it it was at first like I was so excited because I was optimistic that like this would not last nearly as long as the theater was projecting. I mean, they called me and they were like, "So our plan is October," but they let me know straight away, like if it's not better by October, then like we're moving it. And so like I signed on, and I'm sure you did too, knowing full well that like this might not happen until like a year from now.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
Um, so and like I was optimistic, and then like we kept moving, and the pandemic kept sort of surging and surging and surging, and like obviously was getting worse until we got to the point where we were supposed to start production on the show, and there was this like there was so much protocol, and like here's exactly how we're handling it. I mean, I thought they were really well prepared, but
Yeah.
even then it became an excitement of like and a nervousness, frankly, of like, I've never done this before. I don't know how we're going to manage it. And even though they had a plan, I mean, it was just like such unknown territory. Um, Not just performing outside, but like, what is performing in a pandemic even like? And that's what part of Macbeth was like about, anyways. The whole
A lot of,
process.
yeah, figuring it out as we went along. And again, having that time really helped us.
Yeah.
The stage management was so good. Like
Uh huh.
she was rigorous, but it was needed, and
Yeah.
you know, and other people in the show. I mean, we were all very. This was a very like responsible and thoughtful group, and you know, certain people really took it upon themselves to keep up the distancing and reminding everyone that it's important that we mask up, you know, because there's a
Yeah.
tendency to get casual, especially around people you're friends with and you like, but we constantly had that. And that, you know, affected, for me, the show, the performances in a way that I felt it was organic, but initially it was very strange, but it influenced everything. Having the masks, I mean,
Yeah.
and being forced to communicate through them and with them. I don't know how that worked out for you. Like, was it weird trying to like, you know, communicate your goals and things in a scene where you're wearing a mask? You know?
Yeah. I mean, from the jump, like we started rehearsing with people, and we did that thing where we like laid all the cones out, you know, and
Oh yeah,
we
yeah,
had the
yeah.
rule where we were like tethered to the cones, and we couldn't, you know, we sort of had to read and react off of how people were moving because we had to block the show. Um, and like at first, I remember coming home every day, um, really frustrated, not at anybody, but just at like the pandemic, because I consider myself a pretty I don't know what's the word for this. It's not going to sound pretentious. I like intimacy when I'm performing and like in my scenes. I like to be close to people.
Yeah.
I like to touch people and stuff like that. But like literally, we couldn't do any of that. So um, it just for everybody's safety.
It kind of forced you to rise above it, like create
Mhm,
new ways to try to achieve your goals in a scene, or just to communicate.
mhm,
For
absolutely.
for me, in the group scenes, it can be weird being on stage without business or lines, but having the mask, for some reason, it made me feel like, I don't want to say easier, but it's almost like mask class. Like it forces you to create these tableaus and these characterizations that you wouldn't normally do necessarily. You might
Yeah.
be like mouthing in a scene in the background, but like the party scene and things like that, I really enjoyed doing those scenes, you know, once I got used to the mask, because it was like you could do different characterizations that you wouldn't normally think of, maybe.
Right. Well, and there was like, so like speaking of that, I want to pick that up and run with it because I functionally played one character all throughout the show.
Right.
I was Malcolm, and when I wasn't Malcolm, I was a ghost that was supposed to represent Malcolm. So, like, I basically was only ever playing one character. But you, how many
I forget
characters did you
about
play?
that. Okay,
Did you ever
so
count?
well, yeah, but it became it just became second nature, I guess,
Part of the
eventually,
flow. Yeah.
especially with as many quick changes I had to do. Like, again, it's just one of those things that forced me to work against it. And it's always good to have that conflict in any acting, there's always a conflict. And this just added a new conflict that I had to work with the costumes and changing them quickly. And I initially thought there's no way that the staging is going to work. I remember thinking that, and I was almost laughing. I remember finding myself at a lot of rehearsals because we were just like figuring it out as we went. I'd be just kind of laughing, like, what are we going to do? Like, how are we going to
Right.
accomplish ABC? And it just worked eventually. I don't know.
Hmm.
I remember Joe being like, you're gonna, or seeing the costumes the first time. It's like, you're gonna wear this costume, and then you're gonna be wearing this costume. Now both costumes were like robes. I was like, how am I gonna change out of these giant robes? Literally walking off the stage, and then the next scene beginning, and I'm like, and I'm in the next scene. But
Uh-huh. Yeah,
it
there was
worked
like
out.
one section of a rehearsal where we just sat there and like ran the same transition again and again and again, trying different options until you eventually had to. I mean, you literally had the last lines in one scene and then some of the first lines in the next scene.
Yeah, and I remember having like a strange fear. This never happened, I don't think, but I was afraid because I was doing accents with some or voices, I was worried that I would do the wrong character in the wrong scene.
So like
But I was like,
the
what would
thing for
happen?
me with Malcolm that was so interesting to me is that especially in 4-3 there's this conversation of like morals and things like that, and it was for a long time reading the scene I was like, well, like Malcolm does says he's all of these things and then he's not any of these things, and so ultimately we can assume that like he says like you know he's untarnished by lust, he doesn't feel greed, um he's loyal to his country, and so he's sort of painted as this like perfectly like this ideal of what a leader should be, right? This like pristine, um, uh, passionate leader. And so there was something to me that really spoke about like where do we compromise? Like where does the work continue to go? What it striving for idealism instead of like looking at a leader or even an idea or a policy and going like, well, that's good enough for now.
Mm.
Like, and just this idea that like Malcolm is testing Macduff, but his countrymen, and saying like, where will you draw the line? What will you make excuses for? And is any of it acceptable? Um, and then you get the end. The end of the show is so interesting because uh, it's Malcolm saying like, okay, even though like he's been painted as this perfectly laudable hero and new king, he still insists that there is more work to be done, and I think
Mm.
that's a really powerful place to leave that show. That everybody will sort
Yeah.
of get their be thanked properly, but also that like we have to continue and note where our problems came from. And that
It's
like on
very,
certain nights made me incredibly emotional. Like I on stage was like trying to hold it together. Um, it was just crazy the way the show like continued to speak even through performances and stuff. You were doing like photography backstage, uh,
yeah.
and in between shows and stuff. Was there, this is another sort of weird big interview question, but like
Okay.
was there anything um that you captured in your photography? You just always had your camera on you. Was there anything you captured that you felt like um was interesting or enlightening to the show, or anything that like felt very provocative for you?
I really, now you mentioned that, John Stillwagon does one of the more elaborate vocal and physical warm-ups that
He
I've seen in a
does.
long time. And I mean, I come from theater school, so I'm used to seeing that and taking part in that. But his every show is so interesting to watch, and whether he knows it or not, I took a bunch of pictures of him doing a warm-up where it almost looked like he was possessed. Like he would contort his body, and I was just like, this is so interesting. Nobody would ever see this if I didn't take a picture of it. And John, I'm
Right.
sorry if that wasn't okay, but everyone seemed to be okay with me taking pictures. I don't
Yeah.
like to be intrusive.
I will say